The first time they destroyed me, everyone laughed. The second time, no one even noticed. And the worst part? He was standing right there both times, smiling, like I didn't exist. I didn't become invisible overnight. It wasn't some dramatic moment where everything suddenly changed. No, it was quieter than that. Slower, like fading ink on paper. Day by day, word by word, look by look. I disappeared. Back in school, I was the kind of girl people couldn't describe if you asked them. I was always there, but never seen. Sitting by the window, walking along the edges of hallways, eating quickly just to leave before anyone could notice me long enough to remember my face. I wasn't bullied the way people imagine. No one shoved me, no one screamed at me. Instead, they laughed near me, talked over me, erased me in ways that didn't leave bruises, just something deeper, something harder to explain. And at the center of it all were two people who never had to try to be noticed, Ethan Carter and Vanessa Hale. They weren't just popular, they were the kind of people the entire school revolved around. When they walked in, conversations paused just for a second, like the room needed to adjust to them. Teachers smiled differently at them. Students shifted, made space, tried to be closer, louder, funnier, anything to be seen by them. Ethan had that effortless charm that made everything look easy. He didn't chase attention. It followed him. Vanessa decided who mattered, and unfortunately for me, she decided I didn't. It started the day she noticed me looking at him. And from that moment on, I stopped being invisible. I became something worse, something people could use, something they could laugh at, something they could erase again and again without consequences. The cafeteria, the whispers, the chair pulled away just as I sat down, the notebook knocked from my hands, the quiet laughter that followed me like a shadow I couldn't escape. And always, Ethan, watching, not cruel, not kind. Just there, which somehow hurt more than anything Vanessa ever said, because cruelty can be fought. But indifference makes you question whether you exist at all. And still, I made the mistake of hoping. The mistake of thinking I had seen something in him no one else had. The mistake of believing that maybe, just maybe, he wasn't like the others. That illusion shattered the day he looked at me and chose silence again. That was the day I stopped hoping, stopped trying, stopped existing in their world. And slowly, I disappeared. But here's what they never understood. Disappearing doesn't mean ending. Sometimes it means preparing. Because when you have nothing left, you start building something new, something stronger, something no one expects. And I did. Piece by piece, year by year, in silence. Until one day, I wasn't that girl anymore. Not the quiet one, not the invisible one. Not the one who stood there while everyone laughed. I became someone people looked for, someone people listened to, someone people couldn't ignore. And for a long time, that was enough. Until the past decided to remind me it wasn't finished with me yet. It happened on a completely ordinary evening. The kind of evening I used to dream about when I was younger. Successful, controlled, predictable. The city lights reflected in glass buildings that felt like they finally belonged to me. I had just finished a meeting, another deal, another step forward. I was walking without really looking. And then I saw him. At first, he didn't belong in my world. Not anymore. He stood across the street, checking his phone like anyone else. No crowd, no attention, no Vanessa, just Ethan. Older, quieter, almost ordinary. For a second, I thought about walking past him. I should have. But something in me paused. Maybe curiosity, maybe unfinished pain, maybe something I didn't want to name. And then he looked up. Our eyes met. And just like that, everything I had buried so carefully came rushing back. He frowned slightly, studying me, searching, trying to place something that didn't fit anymore. And then he said it. "Wait, do I know you?" I smiled, not because it was funny, but because it was inevitable. "Yes," I said calmly. "We went to school together." He looked closer this time, longer, and I watched the exact moment recognition started forming. Not fully, not clearly, but enough to shift something in his expression. "Right," he said slowly. "You were quiet. Quiet. Of course, that's what I'd been reduced to. Not my name, not my story. Just a shadow of who I used to be. But this time, I didn't shrink." "I was," I replied. There was a pause, different from the ones before. This one felt uncertain. "You look different," he added. I held his gaze. "I am." And for the first time, he really saw me. Not the girl from the past, not the shadow, but something else. Something he didn't understand yet. And that's when everything began to change. I used to believe invisibility was a kind of safety. If no one noticed you, no one could hurt you. That's what I told myself every morning in high school, smoothing down my plain sweater, tying my hair into the same low ponytail, lowering my eyes whenever laughter erupted in the hallway, like fireworks I was never invited to watch. Back then, I was the girl people forgot mid-sentence. The one who blended into lockers, into walls, into silence. And he was everything I wasn't. I remember the exact moment I realized I loved him. It wasn't some grand gesture or movie scene. It was stupidly simple. He laughed. That was it. A careless, warm, effortless laugh that seemed to pull the entire world toward him. And standing just inches away, clutching my books like a shield, I felt something inside me fracture quietly. His name was Daniel, and he was the kind of boy people didn't just like. They orbited him. Teachers praised him. Boys wanted to be him. Girls competed for his attention like it was oxygen. And of course, he was already taken. Her name was Alina. Even now, 10 years later, I can still picture her perfectly. Blonde hair that fell like sunlight over her shoulders, flawless skin, a smile that could command a room without effort. She didn't walk. She arrived. Every step of hers seemed intentional, like she knew the world was watching. And it was. She and Daniel were untouchable together. The perfect couple, the kind people whispered about with admiration and envy. And then there was me, sitting 2 rows behind them in chemistry class, pretending to write notes while watching the back of his head like it held the answers to questions I didn't dare ask. I never spoke to him, not once. I built entire conversations in my mind, imagined what it would be like if he turned around and noticed me, really noticed me. But reality was different. Reality was him leaning over to whisper something to Alina, making her laugh, while I stared down at my notebook filled with words I couldn't even read anymore. The worst part wasn't loving him, it was knowing I didn't even exist in his world. Until the day everything broke. It was near graduation. The school buzzed with that strange mix of excitement and endings. People were signing yearbooks, making promises they wouldn't keep, crying over friendships already fading. I had planned to disappear quietly, just like I always had. No goodbyes, no memories worth holding on to. But that afternoon, something unexpected happened. I was in the library, my usual refuge, when I heard voices. His voice. I froze. "You don't get it, Alina," Daniel said, frustration sharp in his tone. "I'm tired of everything being about appearances." I shouldn't have listened. I knew that. But I stayed, hidden behind a shelf, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure they'd hear it. Alina laughed, a cold, unfamiliar sound. That's funny coming from you? You love this. You love being admired. There was a pause. Heavy. Dangerous. Maybe I thought I did, he replied quietly. Something in his voice shifted, and for the first time, I didn't hear the confident, untouchable boy everyone adored. I heard someone uncertain. Are you seriously doing this now? She snapped. Right before graduation? I'm saying I don't think this is real anymore. The silence that followed felt like the world holding its breath. And then, fine, Alina said, her voice suddenly calm, almost amused. Go find something real, Daniel. Let's see how long that lasts. Her footsteps echoed away, sharp and final. I stayed frozen long after she left. My chest tight, my thoughts spinning. They broke up. The perfect couple, just like that. And then I heard him move. For a second, I thought he might leave too, but instead, his footsteps came closer, until, "Who's there?" he asked. My blood turned to ice. I didn't mean to step out. I didn't mean to reveal myself. But somehow, I did. And for the first time in my life, Daniel looked at me, really looked at me. There was confusion in his eyes at first, then recognition, faint, but there. You're in my chemistry class, right? That was it. That was all I was to him. I nodded, unable to speak. He studied me for a moment, like he was trying to play something just out of reach. And then, unexpectedly, he smiled. Not the effortless, charming smile he gave everyone else. This one was softer, almost tired. Did you hear all that? He asked. I hesitated, then nodded again. Instead of embarrassment, he let out a quiet laugh. Guess the universe wanted an audience. I didn't know what to say. I never did. But before I could even try, he added, What would you do if everything people expected from you suddenly didn't make sense anymore? It was such a strange question, so unexpected. And somehow, it slipped past my fear. I'd leave, I said softly, and become someone they wouldn't recognize. The word surprised even me. He stared at me for a long moment, and something shifted again. Yeah, he murmured. Maybe that's exactly what I need. That was the longest conversation we ever had. The next day, he didn't show up to school. No one knew why. Rumors spread like wildfire. Family issues. A sudden move. Something scandalous. Alina acted like she didn't care. Maybe she didn't. And me? I carried that moment like a secret. Because something about the way he looked at me. It felt like the beginning of something. But it wasn't. It was an ending. 10 years passed. And the quiet girl who once wished to disappear, she did exactly what she said she would. I left, and I became someone no one would recognize. What I didn't know was that one day, by pure accident, Daniel would walk back into my life. And this time, he wouldn't be the one everyone was looking at. I would. If someone had told that quiet, invisible girl sitting in the back of chemistry class that one day people would whisper her name the same way they once whispered Alina's, she would have smiled politely and assumed they were talking about someone else, because back then, I didn't even exist in my own story. I was just there, a shadow passing through hallways filled with brighter people. But the truth is, change doesn't arrive like a lightning strike. It builds slowly, quietly, almost painfully. After graduation, I disappeared exactly as I promised. No dramatic goodbyes, no social media posts, I deleted everything that tied me to that version of myself. It wasn't bravery. It was survival. I couldn't stay in a place where I had spent years feeling like I was watching life instead of living it. I moved to a city where no one knew my name. At first, it was terrifying. Silence followed me there too, but it felt different. Back home, silence meant invisibility. Here, it felt like possibility. I worked constantly. Mornings turned into nights without me noticing. I took jobs no one wanted, learned things no one taught me, and pushed myself in ways that felt almost cruel. There were nights I cried on the floor of my tiny apartment, wondering if I had made a mistake, wondering if maybe I was meant to stay small. But every time I thought about going back, I remembered that moment in the library. I'd leave and become someone they wouldn't recognize. Those words became my anchor. Years passed. Slowly, then all at once. I started my first business by accident. It sounds ridiculous now, but it's true. I had been helping a small local brand with their online presence, something I taught myself out of pure necessity, and within months, their sales exploded. People noticed, then more people, then too many people. Opportunities didn't just come, they collided into me. I built something from nothing, then I built more and more. By the time I was 25, I wasn't invisible anymore. By 28, I was unstoppable. Money stopped being something I worried about. It became something that followed me, multiplied, grew into numbers that didn't feel real. But the strangest part wasn't the wealth. It was the attention. People looked at me now. Really looked. The same way they used to look at Alina. At first, it felt like a victory. Like I had finally stepped into the world I was always kept out of. But the longer I stayed there, the more I realized something uncomfortable. It wasn't that the world had changed. It was that I had learned how to play its game. And I was very, very good at it. But success has a cost no one talks about. The higher I climbed, the more isolated I became. Relationships felt transactional, conversations felt rehearsed. People didn't see me. They saw what I had become. And somewhere along the way, I stopped asking if any of it was real, until the day everything cracked again. It happened in the most ordinary way. I was back in my hometown. I hadn't planned it. I avoided that place for years, as if stepping foot there would drag me back into the version of myself I had worked so hard to escape. But business doesn't care about personal history, and when an opportunity came that required my presence, I couldn't refuse. Driving through those familiar streets felt surreal, smaller than I remembered, quieter, like time had forgotten to touch them. And then I saw it. The cafe. It used to be a rundown corner shop, barely noticeable. Now it was different. Warm lights glowing through the windows, people laughing inside, the kind of place that felt alive. Something pulled me in. Maybe curiosity. Maybe fate. I told myself it didn't matter. But the moment I stepped inside, everything shifted. At first, no one noticed me. I wasn't surprised. Even now, a part of me still expects to go unseen. I took a seat near the window, ordered coffee, and let myself breathe in the unfamiliar familiarity of the place. And then, sorry, we're a bit short-staffed today. It might take a little longer. The voice hit me before the words did. My heart stopped. Slowly, I looked up. And there he was. Daniel. But not the Daniel I remembered. Gone was the effortless confidence, the polished perfection. He looked real. Older, obviously. His features sharper, his expression more grounded. There was something in his eyes I couldn't name, something that hadn't been there before. For a second, neither of us spoke. He didn't recognize me. Of course he didn't. Why would he? I had changed everything. "Take your time," I said calmly, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. He nodded, offering a brief, distracted smile before moving on to another table. And just like that, I became invisible again. But this time, it wasn't the same, because now I had a choice. I could stay silent, or I could let him see me. Minutes passed, but my mind refused to settle. Memories collided with reality, past with present, the quiet girl with the woman I had become. I watched him move around the cafe, interacting with customers, laughing softly, focused on his work. This wasn't the life I imagined for him, not even close. And yet, there was something strangely honest about it. Finally, he returned to my table, placing the coffee in front of me. "Here you go." I looked at him. Really looked this time. And then, before I could stop myself, "Daniel." He froze. Slowly, his eyes met mine again. Confusion flickered across his face, then curiosity, and then something else. "I'm sorry. Do I know you?" he asked. I felt it. That moment. The turning point between who I was and who I had become. And for the first time in my life, I didn't lower my gaze. I held it and smiled. "Yeah," I said softly. "You do." What I didn't realize yet was that this moment wouldn't just change how he saw me. It would unravel everything I thought I understood about the past, because Daniel wasn't here by accident, and neither was I. For a moment, I saw it. The exact second recognition tried to surface in his mind and failed. His eyes searched my face, not casually, but with a kind of quiet urgency, as if something deep inside him was insisting that I wasn't a stranger. And yet, I was. Because the girl he once saw, the one who barely existed, no longer stood in front of him. "I'm sorry," he said again, softer this time. "I feel like I should remember you." That almost made me laugh. Not because it was funny, but because it was painfully accurate. "You don't," I replied gently. "Not really." There was no accusation in my voice, no bitterness, just truth. He frowned slightly, studying me more carefully now. "That's oddly specific." I leaned back in my chair, watching him instead of hiding from him. 10 years ago, this moment would have terrified me. Now, it felt like standing at the edge of something inevitable. "Chemistry class," I said, 2 rows behind you." Silence, and then his expression shifted. Not fully, not completely, but enough. "Wait," he murmured, stepping closer. "You were always quiet. You had that notebook." I tilted my head, a small smile forming. "Filled with things I never said." That did it. Recognition didn't hit him like lightning. It unfolded slowly, like a memory he didn't know he still had. "I remember you," he said, almost to himself. And for some reason, those words felt heavier than they should have, because he didn't remember me. He remembered the outline of who I used to be. "Well," he added, letting out a breath, "you look different." I couldn't help it this time. I smiled fully. "I hope so." There was a pause. Not awkward, just loaded. And then he surprised me. "Sit with me for a minute?" he asked, glancing around the cafe. "I mean, if you're not in a rush." I wasn't. I hadn't been in a rush for 10 years, so I nodded. He sat across from me, wiping his hands on a towel absent-mindedly, like he needed something to ground himself. "This is weird," he admitted with a quiet laugh. "In a good way, I just didn't expect to see anyone from back then." "Neither did I," said. That part was true. But what wasn't true was how calm I appeared, because inside, something had already started shifting. "You disappeared," he said suddenly. The words caught me off guard. "I remember that," he continued. "You were there one day, and then you weren't." I blinked. Out of everything he could have remembered, that's what stayed with him? "I didn't think anyone noticed," I said honestly. He looked at me, something unreadable in his eyes. I did. The air changed, not dramatically, not loudly, but enough that I felt it. And suddenly this wasn't just a coincidence anymore. "So," he said, leaning back slightly, studying me again. "What happened to you?" "Everything. Nothing. A lifetime I couldn't fit into words." "I built something," I said simply. He raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "That sounds mysterious." "It's not," I replied. "Just complicated." He nodded slowly, like he understood more than I expected. "Yeah," he said. "I get that." And somehow, I believed him. But then, something else surfaced. A question I didn't realize I needed to ask until it was already leaving my lips. "What about you?" He hesitated, just for a second. But I saw it. And in that hesitation, there was a story. "I stayed," he said finally. That answer felt heavier than mine. "I can see that," I replied gently. He let out a quiet breath, running a hand through his hair. "Yeah, not exactly the plan, but life doesn't really ask what you planned, does it?" "No, it doesn't." We sat there, the past and present tangled between us, neither of us fully stepping into either. And then, the door of the cafe opened. I didn't turn at first. I didn't need to, because I felt it. That same shift in the air. That same presence I hadn't felt in 10 years, but recognized instantly. "Well," a familiar voice said, smooth and sharp as ever, "this is unexpected." My heart didn't race. It didn't need to. It just sank. Slowly, I turned, and there she was. Alina. Time had been kind to her. Of course it had. She looked just as striking as I remembered, only now there was something colder beneath the surface. More controlled, more calculated. Her eyes moved from Daniel to me. And then they stopped. Recognition hit her instantly. Unlike him, she didn't struggle to place me, because people like Alina never forget the ones beneath them. "Well, well," she said, a slow smile forming. "Looks like the quiet girl finally decided to exist." Daniel looked between us, confusion clear on his face. "You two know each other?" Alina didn't answer him. She kept her eyes on me, but there was something different in her gaze now. Something sharp, something assessing, and then something else. Something that didn't belong. Because for the first time since I had known her, Alina didn't look at me with indifference. She looked at me like I mattered. And that's when I understood. This wasn't just a coincidence. This wasn't just a reunion. And whatever story I thought I was stepping back into, I had been wrong. Completely wrong. Because the real story, the one that had been unfolding for 10 years, had nothing to do with the girl I used to be, and everything to do with the woman standing in front of her now. "You've changed," Alina said quietly. It wasn't a compliment, it was a realization. And then she added, "Good." Daniel frowned slightly. "Okay. I feel like I'm missing something." "You are," Alina replied calmly. Her eyes never left mine. "But you won't be for long." A chill ran through me, because in that moment, I knew. The past hadn't followed me here. It had been waiting for me. And whatever came next wasn't going to be simple, or fair, or safe. There's a moment, right before everything collapses, when the world feels unnaturally still, like it's holding its breath, like it knows something you don't. That's exactly how it felt sitting there, between Daniel and Alina, the past tightening around me like a slow, deliberate trap I had unknowingly walked into. You won't be for long. Her words echoed in my mind long after she said them. Daniel shifted uncomfortably, his gaze moving between us, trying to piece together a puzzle neither of us had explained. Okay, seriously, what's going on? Alina finally looked at him, her expression softening just enough to resemble something human. Relax, Daniel. It's just history catching up. History. Such a simple word. Such a dangerous one. I should get back to work, he said, though he didn't move. Not yet. Something was keeping him here. Something unspoken. Alina smiled faintly. You always were bad at walking away when things got interesting. That landed heavier than it should have. I saw it in the way his jaw tightened. Some of us don't have the luxury of leaving, he replied. There it was again. That tension beneath the surface. Something unresolved. Something deeper than a high school breakup. And suddenly, I wasn't just observing anymore. I was inside it. Alina turned back to me, her gaze sharp again. Can we talk? It wasn't a question. I should have said no. I should have stood up, walked out, gotten back into my carefully controlled life where nothing could surprise me like this. But I didn't. Because some part of me needed to know. So I nodded. We stepped outside, the cold air hitting my skin like a wake-up call I didn't want. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. And then, you built it fast, she said. I frowned slightly. Built what? Her lips curved, but there was no warmth in it. Don't play that game with me. I know exactly who you are. My stomach tightened. Not from fear, from realization. How? I asked quietly. She laughed under her breath, shaking her head. You really think you're the only one who learned how to disappear and come back different? That wasn't an answer. That was a warning. I've been watching you, she added. That changed everything. The air felt heavier, colder. Why? I asked. This time her smile faded, and for the first time since she walked in, Alina looked serious. Because 10 years ago, she said slowly, something happened that you don't fully understand. A chill ran down my spine. I think I understand enough, I replied. You and Daniel broke up. Life moved on. Her eyes darkened. No, she said. That's what it looked like. Silence. Then, what actually happened? I asked. And that's when everything broke open. He left because of you. The words hit like a shockwave. I blinked. That's not... It is, she cut in sharply. You think that conversation in the library was meaningless? You think no one else saw you walk out of there with him looking at you like that? My mind spun. That wasn't... We barely spoke. But it was enough, she said coldly. Enough for him to start questioning everything. Enough for him to walk away from me. From everything. I felt something crack inside my chest. Not guilt. Something more complicated. You're saying I caused that? I asked, my voice quieter now. I'm saying, Alina stepped closer, her voice low and precise, that you were the beginning of the end. The world tilted slightly, because I remembered that day. The conversation, the way he looked at me. But I never thought it meant anything beyond that moment. You're wrong, I said, though it sounded weaker than I intended. Am I? The question slipped in before I could stop it. Alina watched me carefully, like she could see that doubt forming. And then she delivered the final blow. "He didn't just leave me," she said. "He left everything, his family, his future, opportunities people would kill for." I swallowed. "And you think that's because of me?" "I know it is," she replied. Silence stretched between us, heavy, suffocating. "And now you're back," she added. "After building your perfect little empire, you walk into his life again like it's nothing." I felt it then. Not guilt, not shame, but anger. Slow, controlled, sharp. "You think I planned this?" I asked quietly. "I think," she said. "You don't even realize the damage you cause." That did it. Something inside me snapped into place. For years, I had let the world define me, the quiet girl, the invisible one, then the successful one, the untouchable one. But this accusation, this narrative she was trying to force onto me, no, I wasn't that girl anymore. "Let me make something clear," I said, my voice steady, colder than I had ever heard it. "I didn't take anything from you." Alina's eyes narrowed. "He made his own choices," I continued, "just like I made mine." "And look where that got him," she shot back. I held her gaze. "And look where it got me." That landed. Hard. For the first time, she didn't have a response. Just a flicker of something in her eyes. Not anger, not superiority, something else. Something closer to uncertainty. And that's when I realized this wasn't about the past. Not really. This was about now. About what I had become. About what she had lost control over. "You didn't come here by accident either, did you?" I asked. Her silence answered me. Of course. This wasn't a coincidence. This was a collision. Carefully timed, carefully planned, and I had walked right into it. "So what is this?" I asked. "A confrontation? Closure? Revenge?" Alina exhaled slowly, and for the first time, she looked tired. "I wanted to see if it was real," she admitted. "What?" "You," she said. "All of it. The success, the reputation, the power." I didn't respond, because suddenly I understood. "And?" I asked. Her eyes met mine, and for the first time in 10 years, there was no mask. "No," she said quietly. "I think it's worse than I imagined." A strange calm settled over me, because in that moment, I realized something that changed everything. This wasn't my downfall. This wasn't my past catching up to me. This was something else entirely. This was the moment I stopped being part of their story and became the one who decides how it ends. Behind us, the cafe door opened. Daniel stepped outside, his gaze immediately locking onto us. "What's going on?" he asked. I looked at him, really looked at him, and for the first time, I saw the truth. Not the boy I once loved, not the man standing in front of me, but the space between those two versions, the choices, the consequences, the unfinished story, and I knew this was it, the moment everything would be decided, not 10 years ago, now. "Daniel," I said calmly. Both of them looked at me, waiting, and I realized, for the first time in my life, I wasn't invisible. I wasn't uncertain. I wasn't standing behind anyone. I was the center of this story, and whatever happened next would change all of us, forever. There's something strangely quiet about the moment your life splits into before and after. No thunder, no warning. Just a shift so subtle. You almost miss it. Daniel stood there looking between us, the tension thick enough to choke on. Alina didn't move. I didn't either. For a second, it felt like we were all frozen in a frame that had been waiting 10 years to be completed. "What's going on?" he asked again, this time more firmly. I could have told him everything. I could have repeated Alina's words, thrown the past at him, forced him to see what she believed, what she had carried all this time. I could have made him choose between guilt, between memories, between two versions of a story neither of us fully understood back then. But as I looked at him, I realized something unexpected. I didn't need him to choose, because this was never really about him, and maybe it never was. "Nothing you need to fix," I said calmly. Alina's head snapped slightly toward me, surprised. Daniel frowned. "That doesn't sound like nothing." I stepped closer, just enough that the distance between us felt intentional. 10 years ago, I said, you asked me what I would do if everything people expected from me didn't make sense anymore. Recognition flickered in his eyes. I saw it clearly this time. "I told you I'd leave," I continued, "and become someone they wouldn't recognize." Silence wrapped around us. "And you did," he said quietly. It wasn't a question. "No," I replied, meeting his gaze steadily. "I became someone I recognize." That difference mattered, more than anything. Alina let out a soft breath beside us, almost like a quiet realization settling into place. "And what about now?" Daniel asked. That question, it held weight. Because now wasn't 10 years ago. Now, I had everything I once thought I wanted. Power, control, visibility. But standing there, between the boy I used to love and the girl I used to fear, I understood something I hadn't before. None of it meant anything if I let the past define the present. "I'm not here to rewrite anything," I said. "Not your choices, not hers." "Not mine." Alina watched me closely, carefully, like she was trying to find the angle, the weakness, the hidden motive. But there wasn't one. Not anymore. "You really believe that?" she asked quietly. I turned to her. For the first time, I didn't see her as the untouchable girl from high school. I saw her as someone who had been holding onto a version of the past for too long, just like I had. "I think," I said gently, "we all built stories to survive what we didn't understand back then." Her expression shifted. Subtle, but real. "And now?" she asked. I paused, because this part mattered. Now was a choice. A real one. "Now," I said slowly, "we decide whether we keep living inside those stories or finally step out of them." Silence. Deep. Uncomfortable. Honest. Daniel looked between us, like he was seeing something he hadn't before. Not just two people from his past, but two completely different paths that had somehow led back to this exact moment. "I didn't leave because of you," he said suddenly, looking at me. Alina stiffened slightly. I didn't interrupt. "I left because something felt off," he continued. "And talking to you that day just made it impossible to ignore." His voice wasn't defensive. It was clear. "I didn't even understand it myself back then," he added. Alina looked down briefly. Not defeated, but thoughtful. "And I stayed angry because it was easier than admitting that," she said quietly. That surprised me. Not the words, but the honesty. The three of us stood there, the weight of 10 years shifting, not disappearing, but changing. And then something unexpected happened. Alina laughed. Softly. Not the sharp, controlled laugh I remembered. Something lighter. "Wow," she murmured. "We really let one moment define everything, didn't we?" No one answered, because we all knew the truth. Yes, we did. And then, before this story reaches its final note, before you decide what this moment means, I want to pause with you for just a second. Because maybe you felt something similar. Maybe there's a version of your past that still follows you, quietly shaping your choices. If that's true, then stay with me until the end. And if this story is starting to feel a little too real, you already know what to do. Leave a like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments. Would you have made a different choice? Because here's where it matters most. Daniel took a step back, exhaling slowly. So, what happens now? Simple question, impossible answer. I looked at them, at everything this moment carried. And then I smiled. Not the careful smile I learned over the years, not the quiet one from the girl I used to be. A real one. Now, I said, we go on. Alina raised an eyebrow. That's it? That's everything, I replied. Because moving forward isn't simple. It's not dramatic. It's a decision, one you make again and again. Daniel studied me for a moment longer, like he wanted to say something else. Maybe he did. Maybe there was a version of this story where we explored what could have been, where we asked the dangerous question of what if. But that version wasn't this one. I'm glad you came back, he said finally. I nodded. Me too, I replied. And for the first time, that was true. Not because of him, not because of her, but because I got to see something clearly I hadn't before. I didn't need the past to make sense anymore. I just needed to stop living inside it. I turned, stepping away from them, from the cafe, from the version of myself that had once felt so small in this place. But just before I left, Alina's voice stopped me. Hey. I looked back. She hesitated, just for a second. And then, you won, she said. I shook my head. No, I answered quietly. I just stopped playing. Her eyes held mine for a moment longer, and then she nodded. Not in defeat, in understanding. I walked away after that, not looking back again. Because some stories don't need a perfect ending. They need a true one. And here's the part that still stays with me. 10 years ago, I thought becoming someone unrecognizable meant becoming someone better. But now I wonder, did I really change? Or did I finally allow myself to be seen? And if one moment can shape a decade, then what will this one shape next?